You know, when you get old like I am, what you like is the way it was back then. You know, I look at the old pictures of Ennis back when, you know, you could drive downtown Ennis and it was just like the street here, you know. No cars. Yeah.
This is my granddad, David Cox. We all know him as Nonnie. Growing up, your relationship with your grandparents is based on facts and surface level conversations about school and work, and the highlights of each other's lives. What's great about that is you discuss what's exciting and put your best foot forward. What you miss sometimes with this type of relationship, however, are the day-to-day details and the backstory of what made your grandparents the people they are. Nonnie's an interesting man who has stories about a time when our country was different, when life was harder in many ways and in some ways simpler. My brother and I decided that we didn't want to forget any of these stories, and Nonnie was gracious enough to tell us some. So we decided to interview him and see what he had to say.
I was born in a country between Boyce and Garrett, which is out in the country about 3 miles. And I was born in, I think, the one bedroom we had in this house, in the back bedroom. No doctor or anything like that. We had a midwife that came. And when you were born, the mother could not get out of bed for 2 weeks. They had to care for her and do all of her chores. And you would have an aunt that came and tended to me for 2 weeks, and she would nurse. Of course, there was not formulas or bottles or anything like that. My life was kind of split. I lived for 6 years till I was 6 years old in the country. I mean, there was no houses around. It was in the country. And keep in mind, we had no car. And so when I was 6 years old and started to school, we moved actually to Garrett. And then Garrett had 125 people. And you knew everybody and everything. So I had two phases of my life, before I went to school and after I went to school. But I can't remember as much before I went to school, but I remember it was almost a sin to wear things like shoes. You know, you had one pair of shoes and you had to preserve them, and many times your clothes were what we call hand-me-downs. I remember a picture I have of myself, and I'm barefooted with short pants on, and the belt that I'm wearing, the end of the belt hangs down almost to my knees because it had been my father's belt, and he'd take a ice pick and just cut another notch in it and draw it up. So I mean, things like that, they were not unusual, you know. And when I went to Garrett, it was first grade in school, and things changed there. But the thing about it is, you had a lot of kids around because everybody had large families because, like I say, that was free labor. And you didn't have cars, so you tended to not have friends down the road that you played with because they had to walk down there, you know, and it was a long way. So school was a big thing. Church was a big thing. Garrett had a school for 8 years, elementary school. Used to have a high school. My mother graduated from Garrett High School. Sports, the girls played volleyball and basketball, and so we had life pretty well as it is, but we had churches there. Everybody was religious back in those days. Churches, we had a lot of churches in Garrett, because if you didn't go to church, you were going to hell, and you were going to get there in a hurry, you know, and that's, but we had a general store there, and I grew up in Garrett. When you grew up in Garrett, I mean, I rarely ever, and Garrett was a little town, I rarely ever got out of Garrett. I mean, that was where you were. You went to school there, you went to church there, you had general stores there, you had post office there, and Garrett was a town, you know. But mostly the things back then was, and even in Garrett after I came to Garrett, personal hygiene. You don't think about things like that, but I don't remember when I was a little boy ever brushing my teeth or anything. I really don't. And maybe I did. I do remember baths, and you took one once a week on Saturday, and whether you needed one or not, you took one every 7 days. And since there was no running water, no automatic heat or anything like that, that involved getting what we called a number 3 wash tub, which was a galvanized tub, putting it in the middle of the kitchen floor, lighting every burner on the stove, and opening the oven door for the heat. And there were 5 of us children, and you had to heat the water on top of the stove to get hot water. So Mother wasn't going to sit there and heat water 5 times to get 5 baths. So you shared bath water, which is something today that would seem weird because I always bathed in my sister ahead of me, Barbara's bath water, which she had just gotten out of, and it's kind of funny. She was mean, I thought. She thought I was mean, but she would pump my ears down a little bit if I did anything wrong. And if I didn't do something that she wanted me to do, she'd say, "I'm going to piss in the water." And she might have done, and I fully didn't know, but she got my attention with it, you know. Timothy texted me one time and asked me, "What kind of toys did you have when you were growing up?" I said, "What's a toy?" Toys were the big thing. It was an activity that we took on to get a toy. We would make rubber guns, and you'd make a rubber gun by getting a box that fruit came in or something and cutting the shape of a gun out. And rubber back then, there was no synthetic rubber. It was really rubber, and it would stretch, 36 inches long. And so you would pin a clothespin on the handle of the gun, and you would have rubber bands that were really inner tubes that you'd tie a knot in them, and that was your bullets. And you cut notches in the gun, and so to load your gun, you'd put a rubber there and go to this notch, and so it was a revolver. It had 4 or 5 shots, but that was the thing. It wasn't just a toy. It was something to do while you made your toys, and kites and things like that. You had paper that Mother had for you, and you didn't have glue or anything like that. You made your paste with flour and water and things like that, and Mother would always keep a big ball of twine. We'd make a kite, and so we did kites and rubber guns and things like that, and it was actually a fun thing. And you got, you had a shield. You'd cross your 2 rubber guns, and we had water. So it was mainly, we just didn't have things that people now take for granted. We had to invent things to do. We really did. And it wasn't long because you started working when you were about 11 years old. And I remember my sisters and brothers all picked cotton, and girls picked cotton, and boys picked cotton, and everybody picked cotton. Cotton was a way of life. That was the #1 product of everybody. And I remember your mother wanted to get rid of you. She wanted you to go with your sisters and brothers, whatever they did, and they didn't want you to go. So it was, but I remember the first cotton sack I ever had was Mother's clothespin bag. She had a big bag, burlap bag, and she kept all the clothespins because you hung clothes on the line out in the yard to dry. And this man, of course, he knew I was a little kid and they were babysitting me. And so he'd give me a penny every time I filled the clothes thing up with cotton, Everybody, the men, women didn't work, of course, but the men mostly were sharecroppers, which is a sharecropper is what people with money have land, and you raise cotton on it, and they get a fraction of it, and you get the rest. And that's nobody went to college or anything, and that's the work that they could handle. And that was basically what everybody did. And children were a blessing from a funny point of view. They were laborers, free laborers. And you pick cotton, and you chop cotton, and you haul cotton, and you gathered garden fruits, and you canned and things like that to preserve vegetables and everything. And that was what, like I say, there was no electricity. There was no, now we did get electricity when I was about 4 years old. And there's no, like I say, refrigeration, no indoor bathrooms, no anything like that. We played. The things that were different about it, I guess, is food, personal hygienes, and things like that. We had a milk cow. We had a hog for pork. We had chickens for eggs and milk and whatever, and we had a garden. So we had plenty to eat. There was no refrigeration, okay? So that changes life right there. There were no indoor bathrooms. That changes life. But in pork, you could hang it in what we call a smokehouse, which is a shed, kind of half underground, and it would, you salt the pork, and it kept, and it was fresh. So, and we had a garden, so the only thing we didn't have was flour and sugar, things like that you can't raise, and so Daddy and Granddaddy would go to town, I don't know, once a month or something, and without any money, and they'd come back with that kind of stuff. I don't know how they got it, but because money didn't really much exist, you know. It's a nickel was a lot of money.